But my beats, they are hard.
Hello and welcome back to the BCSN SportsWrap. Brian Fulford, AD Drew here. Coming out of the break there after we just went through the Celebration Bowl, and now we get into some of our superlatives. And just to sort of set this up, some of the things that AD and I have been talking about over the last few days and that we want to put out there. Obviously, there are different All-American groups, and we're not doing an All-American, per position thing. We've decided to do a top five in keeping with our theme of top fives, as we do with our poll. We're doing a top five offensive players of the year, top five defensive players of the year, top five special teams players of the year, and top five coaches of the year. And, of course, this is through all of Black college football. Now, one of the things that I think we'll put together and publish separately is maybe from a FCS level and D2 level, under D1 level. We'll do those separately. We'll kind of publish those on our website, post them on social media. And we'll do that and even get into more specific positions, talking about running backs, wide receivers, maybe offensive linemen, things that we can be more specific about, post it out there, give recognition and props to those. I mean, there's a lot of outstanding things that have been done, and so trying to, it's always challenging trying to take all of it and bring it together because there have been some outstanding performances and players this year. Other thing we're doing, we're going to be, and this will be in another show that'll come out at the end of the week, we will talk about the performances of the year. We'll also talk about the top plays of the year. When we say performances, we mean the individual game performance. For example, Deshaun Weddington rushing for 307 yards on 33 carries to end the season. Great performance. Where does that rank? Or maybe we don't rank it. We just talk about it. Also, plays of the year. I mean, just offhand, we were going through some memorable plays through the year. So we'll definitely spotlight those as well. And then, of course, the team. And I guess this is another debate, AD, for us to figure out. The individual team of the decade versus the program of the decade. Top five. We will go through and list that as well, because we definitely have some individual teams, but we also have some individual accomplishments. Like, obviously, these past 3 years for North Carolina A&T, pretty good. Winston-Salem State at the beginning of the decade, pretty good, right?
Yes.
Grambling had a 2 or 3 year run there. So I mean,
Bethune opened up the decade with an excellent.
Bethune,
run,
yeah, they had an excellent run.
Make sure we don't get into recency bias as we do this.
And see, that's why I like this. This is a great time of year for this, because we're coming up at the end of the decade. The end of the teens. Next year it'll be 2020, and so it'll be the 100th anniversary of the SWAC. It'll be the 100th anniversary of a black college national champion. The first national champions, note I said two, were named in 1920. And there were
we
two.
had controversy back then, Bryan?
Controversy, yes. 99 years ago, there was controversy. So, of course, there's going to be controversy this year with the Black College National Champion. It's only fitting that that we do that. And, we'll get into that here shortly. But it's that time where let me pull up my page here, where I have all this fun stuff listed. AD, do some quick plugs while I pull this up. Website, Facebook page, all that fun stuff here.
You can catch us on the World Wide Web, www.mybcsn.net. You can catch our YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook at MyBCSN1. That's MyBCSN and the number 1. My colleague over there, Dr. B, who's having me plug up this dead air right now, you can hit him on Twitter and tell him about himself at DRB365. That's at DRB365. And if you want to tell me about myself, you can hit me up on Twitter at BCSN Drew. That's at BCSN DREW. Do I need to continue on, Bryan, or do I need to let you go?
No, great job. Great job, AD. All right, let's get started here. Let's start with the Offensive Player of the Year. We're going to count these down from 5 to 1. And we're going to start this is our top 5 Offensive Players of the Year, all levels of black college football. And let's start with number 5. And we're going to start with a quarterback. The quarterback from Florida A&M University, Ryan Stanley. Ryan, the grad senior, just graduated from FAMU, was the MEAC Offensive Player of the Year as well. Of course, Ryan led FAMU to a 9-2 overall record. The first time that the program was ranked nationally since, in almost 10 years. Led the offense 256 yards per game. He broke 4 program career records this year. New marks for passing touchdowns, passing completions, passing attempts, and passing yards. Threw for 2,566 yards, 23 touchdowns. Had 3 300-yard games, including a 427-yard game against South Carolina State. He's also a candidate for the Black College Football Hall of Fame Player of the Year, and so that would be number 5. Now, he also, on the watch list for the Walter Payton Award as well, finalist for that as well. Number 5 on our Offensive Player of the Year, Ryan Stanley. You sound like you were going to say something there, AD.
No, you hit it. I was going to mention he broke just about every significant passing record at Florida A&M University throughout his career. The only blemish on Ryan Stanley's record, unfortunately, is 0-4.
Yeah, against Bethune-Cookman, but we're not going to talk about that. All right, number 4. Our number 4 Offensive Player of the Year, and this was a little close race here. It is quarterback Felix Harper of Alcorn State. And Felix Harper was the SWAC Offensive Player of the Year. And what a great story this was for Harper, who came in in a relief effort for Noah Johnson, who was the 28th Offensive Player of the Year in the SWAC, the preseason Offensive Player of the Year in the SWAC. And all he did was just keep the Alcorn State train rolling down the tracks. Now, you'll correct me here if any of you. I'm just going off of the SWAC web page plus what I know from this past Sunday. Felix Harper has finished with over 2,600 yards passing. He had an efficiency rating at the end of the regular season of 167.85, which was pretty good. Where'd that rank in FCS football, AD?
His national rank, give me just a second, Brian. His passing efficiency rating at the end of the year was number 6 nationally. This was before the Celebration Bowl.
Right. He threw, let's see, by our count, has thrown 32 touchdowns, including this is the Celebration Bowl, where he threw 32 touchdowns. That number may or may not have gone up. I don't know if this includes the SWAC championship game. I don't think it does. But anyway, interceptions, the biggest stat, I think, outside of the efficiency rating, but also the interceptions, very low this year. Obviously, he had 3 in the SWAC championship game, but prior to that, had only thrown a couple, 2
versus Grambling, and then he threw 1 in the Celebration Bowl. So
yeah.
The only blemish against Felix Harper in the big games is when he threw his INTs.
Yeah, so again, it's just an outstanding story for Felix Harper there for Alcorn State. All right, let's move to number 3. Number 3. This one might surprise people, but statistically, an unreal year by this young man who, again, he too came onto the scene in relief. And I'm talking about running back Deshaun Wethington from Shawan University. And, he actually, as I pull up the stats, he finished the regular season in Division II with 1,377 rushing yards, 12 touchdowns in 8 games for an average of 172.1 rushing per game. Of course, already I mentioned he had a game at the end of the season in which he rushed for 307 yards. He had an outstanding year for Shawan. Of course, he actually came in relief of, I believe, Tyrell Freeman. I may have the first name wrong, but I believe the last name is Freeman. He was the returning running back for Shawan, who many people, he's a senior. People were expecting big things from him. And I think he got hurt, and in stepped Wethington, and Wethington, did he just take off from that point and had a great year rushing. He only rushed the ball 157 times, AD, 1,377 yards, which in the regular season was more rushing yards than Jermaine Martin had at the end of the regular season, and did it in fewer attempts. So, 172.1 is actually the best per game rushing average in black college football. Any thoughts there on Wethington?
No, not on Wethington in particular. It's just to be noted, this was Shawan's last season competing in the CIAA. Shawan was the non-HBCU member of the CIAA. They will be moving over to the Conference Carolinas beginning next year in all sports, as they only remained in the CIAA in football and bowling this particular year. They will not be competing in basketball in the CIAA this year.
Good point. So I guess they move into that independent status category among black college teams, huh?
Well, Shawan actually is not a HBCU. They were one of the first non-HBCUs admitted into a at HBCU conference. They are only one of two non-HBCUs in HBCU conference, with the other being Spring Hill in the SIAC. So now Spring Hill is the only non-HBCU entity competing in the HBCU conference, and rumors have it that Spring Hill will soon be leaving the SIAC also.
Wow. Well, hey, it makes you – well, I guess it's been fun talking about Shawan over the last couple of years. I mean, obviously, if they fall out of the HBCU market, do we even and that's for another time. But, hey, for today, Deshaun Wellington comes in at number 3. That's interesting. I didn't know all of those stats. So, well, hey, it is what it is.
That's why I got your back.
I appreciate it. All right. Moving over to number 2, the number 2 offensive player of the year, quarterback, Akil Glass, Alabama A&M. And I think it's interesting. And Akil Glass, listen to the numbers. In 12 games played, 273 completions, 445 yards, 445 attempts, 3,600 passing yards, 32 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, 300 yards per game average. In the SWAC, just so you know, only one other player in this decade had a performance on the level that Akil Glass had, and that was Casey Therault. Now, I may say that name wrong. Casey Therault was a quarterback from Jackson State in 2011. And in 11 games, Therault threw 272 completions in 453 attempts, 3,800 yards passing, 27 touchdowns, 15 INTs. He averaged 346.2 a game. Glass's average per game, he's only the 3rd guy in the decade to average 300 yards. 32 is only surpassed by a pair of Grambling quarterbacks. And now I guess you could say Felix Harper if you look at total numbers. The passing yards, only Therault had more passing yards in the decade. And in terms of completions, 273 trumps 272, so he had the most completions, although he did it in one more game. But anyway, it was a record year for Akil Glass, who probably, he finished as, second team All-SWAC. He wasn't Offensive Player of the Year. I don't know how close the votes were with Felix Harper, but I got to believe that they were on the border. And only a story like Felix Harper's could surmount what Akil Glass did this year. Wouldn't you say, AD?
Yes, you're absolutely correct. Obviously, the one big thing between the two, Harper only started, I believe, 8 games regular season, Brian, whereas Glass started all 11 games for A&M.
Right. So, again, congratulations, number 2 Offensive Player of the Year, Akil Glass, Alabama A&M. And that means number 1 is wide receiver / return specialist Chris Rowland of Tennessee State, who was the Ohio Valley Conference Player of the Year, Offensive Player of the Year. It wasn't a great season for Tennessee State, but Rowland, who originally came in the year, focused in as a return specialist, and he had done a little bit in the receiving game, but he just started having game after game. He had 104 receptions this year for 1,437 receiving yards and 8 receiving touchdowns. All-purpose, 2,110 all-purpose yards. He averaged 175.83 yards per game. He did all that in 152 plays. So when you go and look at the numbers, he led all of black college football. Matter of fact, he broke Jerry Rice's 30-something year record of receiving receptions. The previous years, Rice had 103 and 102 in Rice's senior and junior seasons. So Roland broke that mark. He now stands alone atop the receptions list among HBCU players. 1437 was number one in FCS. I think he finished one reception behind another young man from like Houston Baptist for number one in receiving yard and receptions this season. All-purpose yards, he was number one. Now, obviously, the yards per game, he was number two. But just an outstanding year for Chris Rowland this year. All-American, I've seen in a couple different polls. He really, it'll be interesting. Rowland is a finalist for the Black College Football Hall of Fame Player of the Year, along with who else is on that list? AD Harper, Stanley, and there's somebody else. Oh, I think Jermaine Martin is on that.
Jermaine Martin, yes.
Yeah, Jermaine Martin is on that. So it'll be interesting to see if Rowland wins the award or how that award shapes out. But for us, it's all about Chris Rowland. Your thoughts, AD?
No, you about hit it on the head. The only thing that I will bring up about Tennessee State, and I'm going back to the Celebration Bowl on this, you know, with Tennessee State and Hampton not being able to compete in the Celebration Bowl because of conference tie-ins, what's going to happen when one of those programs has a 10-1 season or 11-0 season?
Well, and that's the argument that more than a few people and have brought up, that's why this game isn't all technically the Black College National Championship game. I mean, let it be what it's going to be.
It is until one of those two teams has a breakout year.
Well, no, I disagree. Because those teams,
it's kind of like the Rose Bowl used to be when they weren't members of the old, what was it, the BCS or Bowl Alliance or whatever alphabet soup they used at that point in time when the Rose Bowl was not a part of it. The Big Ten. I
can't call it a championship game unless everybody has an opportunity to play in it, and everybody doesn't. Now, why is irrelevant? The why to me is irrelevant, but the eligible FCS teams, not everybody has an opportunity to play in it. And while MEAC versus SWAC are the two main conferences, and usually the team that comes out of it will have a strong claim. You may have a year where you have a strong D2 team, as we've seen in other years. As you mentioned, Hampton or Tennessee State might have a great season and then advance into the playoffs. Or you could have a scenario like what we have this year. So look, I get it, the marketing, I get it, but anyway, I don't want to labor that point longer. Other names that were on my list, AD, and you tell me if you have any names on your list that we may have, obviously these guys had great performances. Sure, they didn't make the top five, but they had great years all the same. Jermaine Martin of North Carolina A&T, Jordan Bentley, Alabama A&M, Jerome Johnson of Bowie State, Tim Whitfield of Langston, Austin Hensley of West Virginia State, Xavier Smith of FAMU.
The only other name that I think we ought to throw up in there, Brian, is Hosea Franklin from Lincoln of Missouri. He was their offense this year.
Yeah, good point. All right, let's move forward here. Let's move forward now to our top 5 defensive players of the year. Top 5 defensive players of the year. We're going to start with number 5. And interesting enough, he was the CIAA Defensive Player of the Year. And I'm talking Dimitri Morcell, the sophomore defensive back of Bowie State, had 9 interceptions, which tied him for the best in Division II, most interceptions in Division II. He returned 3 of those interceptions for touchdowns, which was first in Division II, for a total of 235 return yards, which the return yards were number 2 in Division II. So Morcell was also the CIAA Player of the Year. And look, I think there's two ways to value defensive backs. You have safeties and you have corners. And Morcell, the native of Upper Marlboro, Maryland, the fact that he got his hands on 9 picks and he took 3 of them to the house is pretty doggone impressive to me. Any thoughts on Morcell there?
Deion Sanders type player for Bowie State.
Yes, sir. Be interesting to see his career moving forward. Number 4, a lot of people may not know about this young man, but we've been paying attention to him. This has been one of your teams. You've been high on this team all year, and that's Dustin Crozier, redshirt junior linebacker from West Virginia State, had 133 tackles, which was the most of any player in black college football, had 77 solo tackles. I believe that, too, was the most of any player in black college football. Played in 11 games this year, had 9.5 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks, 1 fumble recovery. He missed out on having the most tackles in a game. I think that honor went to Solomon Muhammad. I think he had 18 in a game. But Crozier had a game in which he had 17 tackles, 5 of them were solos, and then he had a game where he had 16 tackles with 13 of them solo. So a lot of opportunities for Crozier, and that was on it wasn't like he was on a poor, how do I want to say this? He wasn't on a team that wasn't in contention. He was just on a team that scored a lot, and they gave up a lot of points, but he got a lot of tackles in the process too. All right, moving on to number 3. Number 3 on the top 5 defensive players of the year, Darius Royster, the redshirt senior defensive lineman from North Carolina Central, had 75 tackles, 44 of them were solo, 16 tackles for loss, 98 yards on those tackles for loss. He had 9 sacks, 63 yards in losses, 3 forced fumbles, 4 quarterback hurries. But that only tells part of the story for Royster. And I don't have this quickly pulled up, so I'm going to wing this here. But if you go, Royster, I believe, and I may be wrong, but he set some numbers for North Carolina Central that hadn't been touched in like 25 or 35 years. I think they were most tackles from the defensive line position. Most tackles for loss, I think, was also a big number, something that hadn't been touched in decades. I'm talking 25, 35 years. I mean, obviously, he had a tremendous year. I think he was the box to row defensive player of the year. And he was, of course, the MEAC defensive player of the year. So Darius Royster, number 3, an outstanding story. Highly recommend you go and take a look at, just type in the name Darius Royster, and you'll see this young man had an amazing end to his football career at Central. Number two, big fella up front, defensive lineman, a redshirt junior, Demetrius Harris of Fort Valley State, played in 10 games up front, had 43 tackles, 25 of them solo, but his impact came in the tackle for loss and sack category, where he had 19.5 tackles for loss, an average of 2 tackles for loss per game, which was ranked number 8 in Division II, 106 yards return of lost yardage. He had 13.5 sacks, which was tied for second most, and 1.35 sacks per game, which was the best average in the nation. Had 2 forced fumbles, 2 fumble recoveries, and 6 forced fumbles for Harris. And, you know, what's interesting, AD, Fort Valley State, he was probably, also he was the SIAC Defensive Player of the Year. I think that should be noted as well. And it's kind of funny. Fort Valley State may not have had a great statistical year defensively, but they ended up with the defensive player of the year, the offensive player of the year. Just gonna mention that. Just gonna say that. You know.
But since we're talking about defense, Bryan, we also have to note that they gave up 71 games, and they gave up 60 in the game, and gave up 45 plus a couple of the times this year.
Oh, you're a cruel man. You're a cruel man for bringing that up. All right, and our number one defensive player of the year in Black college football, Joshua Zakiah Pryor, the redshirt sophomore defensive lineman, the big fella up front for Bowie State, who I got to imagine he probably would have been the CIAA player of the year had it not been for what his teammate, Dimitri Morcell, did. But in 12 games this year, Pryor had 70 tackles. Half of them were solo. 25.5 tackles for loss. Which was the best or most tackles for loss in D2. 133 yards were lost because of those tackles. He had 12.5 sacks at an average of 1.04 sacks per game. The 104 yards that were lost because of those sacks were number one in Division II. He had 8 quarterback hurries, 1 pass breakup, 1 block. Joshua Pryor, the big fella up front, AD, and he got 2 more years of dealing with this young man. I think he's like 6'4", 280. Just a beast up front. Any thoughts on Mr. Pryor, our defensive player of the year?
Just the fact that he was last year's defensive player of the year in the CIAA as a freshman.
Well, there you go. There you go. Well said. I'm glad you said that. And like I said, outside of a guy like Dimitri Morcell, who knows? Just some other names to kind of throw out that had a great year. Guys like Demetrius Lofton, the sophomore from Morehouse, who are on our list, I should say, on our short list. Demetrius Lofton. Yeah, honorable mention or next 5, however you want to call it. Also had Keontae Hampton, the sophomore from Jackson State. Armani Holloway, junior linebacker from Alabama A&M. Tracy Tompkins, a senior DB from Mississippi Valley State. Anybody I missed there?
I think we hit them all on this one, there, Bryan.
Okay, let's move down to special teams player of the year. Special teams. Now, for our special teams player of the year, we're encompassing not only return guys, but we're including kickers and punters and just the special teams game. So I think we've got a nice little potpourri here of all of the above here. So let's start with number 5 down to 1. And number 5, let's go with Jeff Souza, the senior kicker from Virginia Union, who was 15 of 16 on field goals, an average of .938, which was the best average not only in Black college football, but it was the best average in Division II. And, sadly, AD, the one kick he probably wishes he had an opportunity he did not get, and that was in the last game of the season against Virginia State. All right. I hear you there, so I'm like, I know you're there. I thought you were going to jump in there, AD.
No, we're gonna. The only thing that I'm going to say about that, Bryan, where does that play rank in our plays of the year?
Wow. Great question. We may have to, as I said, that's another show. And so moving forward here, number 4, special teams player of the year, Chris Fadul, the senior punter from Florida A&M, an All-American punter. He had 40 punts this year, 1,841 yards. He had an average of 46 yards per punt, which was actually number 2 in FCS football. So great year by Chris Fadul this past year.
And what you have to remember when you think of average yards for punters, a punter can't let it go and boom it every time, because you know as well as I do, there are many times when the punter has to down that ball inside the 20 So for you still to get a 46-yard average, considering the number of times that punters strategically try to place the ball inside the 20, is remarkable, Bryan. So when he's able to let that foot go, he booms it.
Yep. Good point. And unfortunately, I didn't find the metrics or the numbers on like how many times he punted balls inside of the 20 or touchbacks or things of that nature. But we got a chance to firsthand see his work again. You know, we mentioned he had 40 punts. How many did he have in that very first game of the year, AD? That was like 11. Did he have like
11 of them?
13? 11. I thought.
11,
yeah.
No, it's 11.
He had 11 of them in the first game of the year against UCF. So just think about that. All right. Number 3, Corey Banks, wide receiver, junior from North Carolina A&T. He had 660 combined kick return yards this year. He had 21 punt returns for 204 yards. That was number 7 in FCS. He also had 21 returns for 456 kickoff return yards. So actually the second best kick return average or kick return yardage in black college football belonged to Corey Banks of North Carolina A&T. Number 2, Noel Ruiz, the kicker from North Carolina A&T, the junior, was 20, and this includes the Celebration Bowl. He was 23 of 27 field goals, an average of .852, which was the 5th best average in FCS football. But he actually had the best average field goals per game at 1.92 average. That was number 1 in FCS. And he even had a game winner, I believe, at the beginning of the season against Elon. You know, you notice he had 4 misses this year. He missed 2 of them in that game. So, and then he came back and knocked down and had a winner there. Your thoughts there, AD, on Ruiz?
No, it's just great that that teams have that, you know, the kicking game in at HBCU football is such an overlooked game. So the fact that you have the ability to have a punter like that, a kicker like that is tremendous, Bryan.
Right. Good point. All right. So our number 1 special teams player of the year, wide receiver return specialist, number 1 from Bethune-Cookman, Jimmy Robinson of Bethune-Cookman. He had 844 combined kick return yards, which was number 11 in total combined kick return yards in the FCS level. He had 30 returns, 844. They were all kickoff returns. And just among the kickoff return category, he was number 8. So he didn't have any touchdowns this year. But obviously the actual combined yardage were big. And I don't know, AD, you know, all congrats to Jimmy Robinson. There might be some people out there who it's hard to compare kickers, punters, and return specialists, but I think we got a good one there at number 1 for Jimmy Robinson. What are your thoughts there?
I think you hit it on the head, you know, because it's all special teams. It's that third phase of the game where people don't pay attention to. And it's an important part of the game. Sometimes these people get 1-2 touches per game on the kickoff/punt return. Sometimes they get multiple touches a game on a kickoff return. You never want a whole bunch of touches on the kickoff return. You always want them on the punt return because that means your defense is playing good. And for these guys to be able to punt the ball where you need to help your team out as you play the field position game, and when you get close and get shut down, to have a kicker who can put the ball to the uprights really makes a difference on the championship team because, you know, you've got that high school, you always go for it when you're on the other side of the 50 on 4th down versus, hey, if I'm inside the 30, I've got somebody who can get me something out of this drive that's stalled. So All of them are important, Bryan.
All right. Last category for this episode, for this show, our top 5 coaches of the year. And we had about a list of 8 or 9 guys that we all thought were deserving. Great jobs this year, some championship coaches, some coaches who brought their teams from out of nowhere, unexpected, some first-year coaches as well. And so, I think the thing that we tried to do out of looking at our 8 nominees was sort of parse down to guys that either went above expectation or, really had a tremendous season. And so I think we've got some great nominees here. So let's get right to it. Top 5 coaches of the year.
I would say, how about let's start with the honorable mentions this time?
Okay. The honorable mentions. Let me find that page. Some of the honorable mentions this year, we've got Fred McNair of Alcorn State, obviously winning another SWAC championship and getting back to the Celebration Bowl. A great year. And he did it with a new quarterback. We also had Broderick Fobbs, who I thought did a great season. Tough start, but there was a stretch, and I kept telling people in November that from about October until the Bayou Classic, outside of maybe FAMU and Bowie, I thought Grambling was playing the best football heading into the Bayou as anybody in the country. And so who knows what we'd be talking about had Grambling actually made a kick or two in that ball game. Also on the outside, Sam Washington of North Carolina A&T, of course, the championship coach. There he is. And Mr. Washington has had a great level of success in his first 2 years as the head coach. Obviously had been there previous as the DC. And then there's Reginald Ruffin of Miles. And they started the year, they repeated as SIC champions, and he has, put them in a great position this season. Of course, last year we know they had the rough start to the year, and if you just count up the wins from the end of last year, the second half of last year into this year, it's been a great year and a half, great season and a half for Ruffin and Miles, the SIC team of the decade. And I think we kind of came to that consensus based on what Ruffin has done for Miles over the past decade. Any name I failed to mention there in our honorable mention list?
I've got 2 of them.
Okay, go ahead.
One, Fred McNair of Southern.
I meant wait a minute. Dawson Odoms of Southern.
Yeah, Dawson Odoms of Southern. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's all right.
Dawson Odoms of Southern. Fred McNair of Alcorn.
I mentioned him. Yeah, I mentioned McNair.
I'm sorry. Okay,
right.
And then Buddy Pugh at South Carolina State.
Buddy Pugh at South Carolina State, yeah.
Who was declared with a split of the BAC championship.
Yeah, and he actually was named the BAC Coach of the Year.
Was supposed to be his going away year, but he has not officially left the program, but they have not officially left announced a job opening yet. So maybe he is returning one additional year.
Yeah, definitely. Very well could be back for another year. So great candidates, all of them. All right. I think we got, so that's our honorable mention list. Let's get to the top 5, AD. Let's start with number 5. A coach who has, you described it as name a coach that has done more with less over the last 3 to 4 seasons. And once again, did an outstanding job this year. And I'm talking about Quentin Morgan, head coach of Langston University. The Langston Lions repeated they were a share co-champions of the Sooner Athletic Conference. They ended up losing.
Third conference championship in 3 years.
Yeah, third consecutive conference championship in as many years. Obviously, they lost their first conference game in almost 3 years to Ottawa University, but they kind of split. They split the championship, but unfortunately, because of their rankings, were not accepted or did not get an invitation to the NAIA playoffs.
Yes, and what I mean by more with less, people who are not familiar with the difference between NAIA and NCAA, NAIA only gets 16 full scholarships, which they must divide up accordingly amongst their players. Where, as you know, most football teams are going to have 60 to 70 players on the football team at that level. So you've got to divide that pie up by 60 to 70, and you only get 16 pieces that you're going to have to divide up. So Quentin Morgan always has his team in contention. They've won or shared in 3 consecutive conference championships over 2 conferences. So I will ask this question out loud, Bryan. How long will Quentin Morgan remain at Langston? Because somebody at a D2 or a D1 at HBCU should be giving this man a look, an interview, and a serious consideration.
Well, I'm sure the folks who are at Langston don't want to hear that thought or think of that. So I will say, hey, Langston, make sure you're taking care of Coach Morgan, because you had a good one there. You need to make sure you keep him on board. I don't know. It's a great question. I mean, there are no job openings in the SWAC this year, so that would be, to me, the closest HBCU conference to where he is currently. But
and Morgan has ties to the SWAC, having played at Southern.
Okay, so I mean, I have a feeling there may be some openings next year if some programs don't get right. But let's just say right now there are no job openings. I didn't see any no job openings in the SWAC this year. So that'll be thus far. Well, you're right. Good point. That thus far. So, all right, number 5 there, Quentin Morgan, head coach, Langston University. Congratulations to them. Number 4 actually is Willie Simmons of Florida A&M University. Done a great job this year in his second year. Rattlers won 9 games in a row. Of course, they lost the first game of the year. 7-1 was the best record in the MEAC, losing that last game of the season to Bethune-Cookman. Really, it's bewildering to a degree, as that is the 9th consecutive year that Bethune beat FAMU. At least, like you said, last year, the tough part, think about the first 2 years of what Coach Simmons has dealt with. He comes in, inherits a team, puts that team in contention to win the MEAC championship last year. Unfortunately, they falter and lose 3 games in a row, but more importantly, they only needed 1 win, and they lost 2 of the games that they had on their plate, which could have put them in last year's Celebration Bowl. But, however, they did beat North Carolina A&T last year. Then this year, while not many people had them rated high, I mean, we looked at the ratings. They were rated 267th overall. I mean, there are 256 schools. That means there were D2 teams rated higher than FAMU at the beginning of this year. And after
predicted to finish either 3rd or 4th in the conference.
Yes, exactly. They pretty much went on a 9-game winning streak. They beat Southern. Then they beat South Carolina State on the road. It was a closer game than probably it needed to be, but it was still a great game. Then they beat North Carolina A&T at home in overtime, losing their quarterback and having to go to the backup quarterback in the fourth quarter to get that game done. And then, like I said, it just the only thing that the stumble at the end, it's like stumbling across the finish line when if you could have just finished in stride, you would have won the race, but somehow you lost your balance, and the guy in the other lane ended up running through the tape while you were sort of flailing your arms. That's kind of how FAMU's season ended for many people in their mind, but still doesn't take away from what Simmons did. Coach Simmons did a great job, put FAMU football back on the map, and I think there's a lot of anticipation for next year. No postseason bowl bans going into next season, so the Rattlers are right where they need to be in order. And hey, they've already claimed the national championship, so they did finish with the fewest losses in black college football, and they tied with, in Division I, the fewest losses in black college football, FCS, and they tied with the most wins. And actually, you could say in a normal regular season, they had the most wins in a regular season. So, look,
question is, will FAMU win the BCSN national championship? That's the most important question, Bryan.
Yes, that to be announced a little bit later. Okay, moving to number three. Number three in our poll, that would be Coach Charlie Jackson of Kentucky State. And Kentucky State, wow. Coming first-year head coach, and I was impressed talking to him at the SIAC Media Days, but Kentucky State went on, I believe, a 7-3 was their final record.
6-3. Remember, they didn't play their last game due to the
that's right,
being canceled.
Yeah, so 6-3. Only played 9 games, but they beat 2 FCS teams. They beat Robert Morris, and then they beat Jackson State in the Circle City Classic. They did it with a running game where they only completed 31 passes in the entire year. They ran and ran some more. Just an outstanding job. What were some other observations you had of the job that Coach Jackson did this year at Kentucky State, AD?
Well, one way to, if you have a suspect defense, is to run the ball and keep your defense on the sideline so they can rest and cut down on the number of plays. And in today's pass-first, high-powered offense, spread offense systems that many people run today, to see somebody go old school like Charlie Jackson did, and another coach on our list that we're going to mention, it's kind of refreshing. And right now, I think those two particular programs, Kentucky State and the other program that we're going to talk about, have a distinct advantage because no one practices against this type of system anymore. So it's tough to get prepared for in 1 week's time, So that's the big advantage that a team such as Kentucky State has as they continue to try to rise in the SIAC on the west side and take on the likes of a Miles and a Tuskegee and claim SIAC West supremacy.
Yeah, the the rushing offense, you mentioned that for Kentucky State was the best in the SIAC at 2,745 yards. They scored 25 rushing touchdowns, averaged 274.5 rushing yards a game. That's a 5.5 average, which was the best in the conference. And I mentioned,
and I don't
31.
have the number in front of me, but I believe they were, as far as rushing, they were in the top 10 in Division II overall.
I would imagine so. I mentioned passing. They were 31 on the season, passing the offense, 31 of 70. That's 31 completions on 70 attempts, the fewest in the conference. only completed.
Brian, we've had people who've thrown 70 attempts in one game.
It seems that way, right? 617 total yards. They did score 9 touchdowns, though. So, I mean, a third of the passes were touchdowns. They definitely caught some people by surprise, I'm sure. But it's a great job by Coach Jackson. I look forward to talking to him again over the course of the spring, and then again at the media days when we get a chance to. All right, moving forward to number 2, that would be Coach Damon Wilson, Bowie State. What can you say? A record year for Bowie. They went unbeaten, 11-0, CIAA regular season conference championship. They won the North and the conference for the second consecutive year. And this year he did it without Amir Hall. And, I mean, after the 2 previous years where Amir Hall was this mythical legend, I mean, an outstanding quarterback on that level, setting all kinds of records, the Black College Football Player of the Year in many organizations and polls. To do that this year with a new quarterback was a thing of beauty, and it just goes to show what Coach Wilson has and what they've recruited and what they've coached up and what they've built. And obviously we talked about 2 of the top 5 defensive players are sophomores. They have 2 years of eligibility left. So there may be no stopping this Bowie State team over the next couple seasons. Your thoughts, AD, on Bowie and Damon Wilson, the number 2 coach of the year?
Keep something in mind when you talk about the ability of this coach. Remember that Jerome Johnson was not the original starting quarterback of this team. You know, they came into the season not knowing who the quarterback was. They were playing musical quarterback at the beginning of the season, and due to injury and some other factors, Jerome Johnson wound up becoming the ultimate starter and wound up taking that opportunity and running with it.
Yeah,
so kudos to Wilson to be able to make the adjustment and recognize what he needed to do and adjust his offense to the talent that he had at quarterback instead of trying to fit his quarterback into his system.
Exactly. Good point. All right. Well, now we get to our number 1, our coach of the year in Black college football. And it's another coach, another team from the SIAC. And it might have, obviously this is one of the jobs that has been it's just an outstanding job when you just put it in perspective of what has been in place for the last 19 to 20 years. And our coach of the year is Sean Quinn of Savannah State. Finished the season 7-3. Beat every opponent in the SIAC East. This was their first year. Obviously, they unfortunately weren't eligible for the conference championship, but they beat, everyone in that division. They weren't eligible for the Division II playoffs, which is a shame because I would have liked to have seen what they would have done had they got an invite or had they even won. I think them versus Miles would have been a great game. But just the fact that Savannah State's last winning record or year above 500 was 1998. That was the last year that they were in Division II. The last 2 decades were spent when they moved up to Division I, and they eventually spent the second half of the decade in the MEAC, and they were actually a pretty good defense in the FCS. They just never could get it. They just never could get it figured out on the offensive end. And so they toiled away at under can you imagine going 19 years without a 500 or winning season? And just like that, the move back to Division II, and all of a sudden, obviously the challenges of that, AD, the going reduction of scholarships, things of that nature. And they go out and put up a 7-3 record this year. What an outstanding coaching job by Coach Quinn.
Yeah, you go from 63 scholarships down to 36 scholarships. And for Savannah, they actually dropped down to 30 scholarships this particular year, trying to get up under the number due to NCAA compliance and a few other factors at the university. So kudos to that. And you mentioned the offense, Bryan, for Sean Quinn to come in and realize, what he had been doing, what they had been doing was not working, and to have the guts to try something new, this pistol option, as the best way to describe it, was just ingenious on his part to come in and to try it. I guess he figured he had nothing to lose. The worst thing they could do was go 1-10 again or 1-9 again. So to do it and to take the SIAC by storm. And Bryan, this is that second program that I was talking about. They have a system that is tough to prepare for in a calendar week, given the fact that 95% of the nation runs spread option now with the RPOs. For them to run this pistol triple option offense is a defensive coach's nightmare. So kudos to Sean Quinn. They've got a lot of exciting things going on over there at Savannah State. They're expanding the university. They're upgrading their facilities. So kudos to Sean Quinn at Savannah State.
All right. Well, that's our top five. Again, from 5-1, Quentin Morgan, number 5, Willie Simmons, number 4, Charlie Jackson, number 3, Damon Wilson, 2, and Sean Quinn, 1. Outstanding jobs by all of those men. When we come back after this break, we will release and debut our final BCSN top 5 Division I and top 5 under Division I polls. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of debate and talking after this one. We'll be back right after these words.
It's like a loop machine. All around town, people trying to get down. It's like a loop machine.
But you stay hard.